Okay, from now, I'm going to explain a factor of geography that are determining Korean foreign policy. When I say geography, it means interests of neighboring countries. First, the USA. A lot of people are saying currently the decline of America. Obviously, American capability has been declining since the end of Vietnam War. But still, America is the strongest in the world in the fields of economy, military, and hard power and soft power, whatever means you name it. During the Obama administration, he said the pivot to Asia. In other words, America will engage in the Asian matters, or America is a part of Asia, or America is one of the Asian countries. It came back to Asia. And during the Trump and Biden administration, people said the Indo-Pacific. America is a part of Indo-Pacific. For the USA, Korea was a military alliance and economic partner and democracy partner. Have you heard about the Alliance of Democracy or Semiconductor Alliance by President Biden? In order to contain the rising China, it is American strategy to make a alliance against China and the so-called Alliance of Democracy or Alliance of Semiconductor. So Alliance of Democracy contains the US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the so-called AUKUS, and South Korea is considered as of the part of the Democracy Alliance. In this Semiconductor Alliance, the US and Taiwan, South Korea are included. And also for America, South Korea is a strategic front for the containment of China and Russia. So America will never give up South Korea because it's the front line in the containment of the communist powers. Another aspect is the future US, ROK, Japan, Australia, New Zealand alliance, the so-called Alliance of Democracy. There's a strong possibility. And also in the past 2 or 3 decades, South Korea was a partner to dismantle North Korean nuclear weapons, North Korean weapons of massive destruction, WMD, which hasn't been successful yet, but America and South Korea are showing the strong alliance in order to deal with the current North Korean nuclear problems. Second, Japan. Our second neighbor is Japan. Of course, we can say the relative decline of Japan. Obviously, Japanese national capability has declined quite a lot. Traditionally, for Japan, Korea was the land bridge to the Asian continent, or stepstone. If Japan wants to go to the mainland Asia, it has to go through the peninsula. So it's a stepstone or land bridge to the continent. Also, South Korea is an important neighbor. But these words are directly used, sometimes not used, by the different Japanese leaders. Some leaders said Korea is an important neighbor, but some other people, they never mentioned important neighbor. Anyway, so Korea is an important neighbor to Japan and an economic partner. Now, in many areas, South Korea became an economic rival. In some areas like semiconductor areas or microchips and some other electronic areas, South Korea surpassed the Japanese capabilities. So Japan and Japanese people feel threatened by those facts. And also South Korea is a front line, no matter it likes Korea or not, for security against China. A unified Korea that are pro-Chinese, pro-China, would be a serious threat to Japanese security. So Japan wants South Korea as a part of the democratic world and stay there to contain the Chinese aggression. Also, there exists historical agony with Korea. And according to the Japanese public opinion poll, the ROK is the most hated country for the Japanese people. But problem is this: why Korea is the most hated country in Japan? Why? Many Koreans don't understand why Japanese hate Koreans. Probably there could be some reasons for that, which I'm not sure of. First reason could be this: during the colonial period, there were strong, independent, resistant movements against Japan. And after the integration of Joseon dynasty to Japan, Joseon became a terrorist country. And many Joseon people killed Japanese politicians and military generals and tried to kill the Japanese king for a few times. So Japan did not like the terrorist Koreans in terrorism. Second, after the independence, ROK government slogan was in public anti-Japan, particularly during the First Republic, Syngman Rhee administration, anti-Japan and anti-communism, anti-Japan. Third reason could be this: ROK used to receive economic and technological assistance from Japan, including commercial credits and loans. And ROK used to borrow money from Japan and begged for the transferring technology to Korea. So ROK was not a rival in economic sense, was never a rival. But now South Korea is a strong rival in economic terms, particularly the field of electronics. And fourth, the ultra right-wing politicians, particularly in Japan, are manipulating the uncomfortable history for their political purposes. But that is true in the ROK too. In the ROK, right-wing politicians or left-wing politicians, both of them are manipulating the uncomfortable situation with Japan for their political purposes. Excuse me. So I could think of these four reasons, but still we do not understand why some Japanese people are making hate speeches in the streets of Tokyo when Japanese government does not do anything against it. China, the so-called the China Rise or Rising China. Traditionally, Korea was considered as the lip protecting the teeth. Lip, in order to protect our teeth, we must have lip. because Beijing is quite near to the Korean Peninsula. In order to protect Beijing, they must have a lip, the peninsula. At present, South Korea is an economic development model and a partner too. Particularly 5-year development plans. During the 1960s and 70s, South Korean economy pursued the economic development with 5-year economic development plans. And it is a remarkable success. So Chinese government studied very hard about the Korean economic development and adopted the 5-year economic development plans. And also security-wise, South Korea is a strategic partner, according to a document, strategic partner. But China will never allow the US dominating unified Korea. Maybe unification of Korea could be acceptable for China, but it will never allow US dominance of the unified Korea. A unified Korea which is pro-America would be a nightmare for the security of the Beijing government. So for China, North Korea is the buffer zone in its relations towards ROK-US alliance. So they must have a buffer zone in order to soothe or ease up the aggression of the ROK-US alliance. What about Russia? As I mentioned, Russia always seeks for unfrozen ports in the Far East. So the eastern coast of North Korea is a perfect place for ports that Russia could use. Secondly, South Korean investment could be a priming water to attract Japanese capital. Because in the Far Eastern district in Russia, it is the most underdeveloped region in whole Russia. So the Moscow government needs money in order to develop the Far Eastern district. So it needs the money from Japan and South Korea. But Russia and Japan has territorial disputes over the southern tip of Sakhalin. So Japanese does not want to invest a lot of money to Russia. So if South Korea invests money to the Far East of Russia, probably it would attract the Japanese money. So it is really important for Russia to have economic cooperation with South Korea. Lastly, again, same thing. Russia would never allow US dominance over the Korean Peninsula. But it's not the same degree as the China feels, because the Korean Peninsula is far from the main heart of Russia in Moscow. But for China, Beijing is quite close to the Korean Peninsula. But still, Russia does not want any US dominance over the Korean Peninsula. So in sum, no neighboring countries want any drastic change in the Korean Peninsula, and if anything, they would like to participate in the process of change for their vested interests, because they have their own interest over the peninsula. So it seems that none of neighboring countries seem to want unification of Korea. Please don't try anything drastically. Just stay where you are and do as you have been doing. And they would like to secure their vested interests in case of a drastic change in the peninsula. So the ongoing decline of US capabilities has created a power vacuum in East Asia. And created a power vacuum in East Asia, particularly around the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan. And China endeavors to fill that vacuum, but Japan is resisting. So if that is the case, what is going to happen in this region? The US versus China over South China Sea, Taiwan, and North Korea, and China versus Japan over Senkaku or Diaodao Islands. What's going to happen? It's a difficult question, or not difficult question to all of us who are studying East Asian politics.